Welcome to Life Map with Dr. Matt Jensen, a podcast dedicated to empowering teens and young adults. Join us on a journey of self-discovery as we tackle overcoming obstacles and challenges while igniting your true potential in rising to the best version of yourself. Here's your host, Dr. Matt Jensen.
Hey, welcome back once again, Dr. Matt Jensen. Welcome to Life Map with Dr. Matt Jensen, a podcast aimed for teens and young adults as we continue down our journey of life and try to get through the minefields and hazards that seem to be lurking around every corner. And as we try to find the solutions, not just to overcome the problems and obstacles, but how to embrace the wonderful opportunities that are yours, the generation of the teenagers, young adults, and of course, we always know that moms and family members are listening. So welcome to you as well. I'm just really excited to introduce our guest today. I alluded a week or two ago in one of these episodes that I was going to have a special guest, and I was just visiting with her before we started recording, and Dr. Angela Patterson checks off all the boxes when it comes to this world of media and screens and virtual realities. And not only does she have a background in that, but she's focused her work and her aim and her target to the same audience that I try to reach, to you teenagers, you college students, or you young adults that are trying to find your way. So without further, let me just give you a brief introduction, and then I want to get her talking, because she is just a joy to speak with. Dr. Angela Patterson is an experienced writer and communicator with a 20-year background in journalism, marketing, PR, and corporate communications. After starting her career as a newspaper reporter, she shifted to corporate communications in the automotive industry, then to the nonprofit sector. Hey, maybe I can get her to fix my car someday. Anyway, moving on. Currently, she's the lead writer and editor at Springtide Research Institute, which studies young people's religious and spiritual lives. She also lectures on organizational behavior at Fielding Graduate University, where she earned her doctorate in media psychology. Her research examines the impact of digital media on young and marginalized groups' spiritual development. Angela also holds a master's in journalism from Indiana University in Bloomington and a bachelor's from the University of Southern Mississippi. You can follow her on Instagram at Dr. Angela Patterson. And in our show notes, we will make sure that we list all of the ways that you can follow her and get in touch with her, as she brings just a great pedigree of experience in the media world, both traditional sense and in this new world of digital communication. Dr. Patterson, welcome to the show, and thanks for taking time to be with us today.
Dr. Jensen, thanks for having me. And I sure wish fixing your car was within my skill set. I would love to have that skill, but that missed me. I got the media stuff down, though.
She got the media stuff. She made the automotive groups look good, is what she's trying to say.
There you go.
In a very well. Hey, let's start. So this is a great let's start with your background, because I think that really leads us in to, as your interest and your desire to kind of evolve your focus over the years, and why that is so crucial to the younger generation today. And I always say to my young listeners, don't ever be offended when I say younger generation, because the fact of the matter is we've all been there if we're not there yet. And so the purpose of our podcast, the purpose of all of our guests, is just to give our listeners as much as they can when it comes to the ability, the tools, the know-how to mine this difficult world that they're living in. So let's turn the time over to you, Dr. Patterson, for a minute. Tell us about how your background in media started to give you a shift in working with, or at least targeting, young people and their spiritual lives, and I'm assuming helping them to get the most out of life and to find that level of happiness that some of them struggle to find.
Absolutely. So I have always been keenly interested in people's stories. I used to write stories as a kid. I was on newspaper and yearbook and school, all of that sort of thing. And I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a journalist. And so I set out to do exactly that. And then I don't know if you know, but the newspaper industry hasn't fared well for some time. And so it was only a matter of time until I made my transition out of the newspaper industry and into corporate communications, where I got to tell a different set of stories for
Right.
some time. It wasn't until, uh, gosh, probably 2015. So fast forward some years, I've been in corporate America a long time. I discover this thing called media psychology, which most people say, well, what the heck is that? They don't even know what that is. I also didn't know what it was when I first discovered it. But what it is it's this beautiful blend of understanding the psychological processes behind media, within media, and what happens after us humans interact with media. So, as somebody who's been a media producer for some time, I was keenly interested in understanding why people react to certain media the way that they do, or don't react to some things that they see.
Right.
So I went in head first. At first I was just planning, it's like, I'm going to do this master's degree. It's going to be really cool. I did a lot of audience development work, and it was really neat. But I started noticing that there were some ties that I was seeing in my classwork, that I was thinking, if media affects us like this, imagine how it affects our religious lives, our spiritual lives, what we think about God, the afterlife, humanity, things that like kindness, wisdom, joy, all these sorts of things. And so I started to dive a little bit deeper and dive a little bit deeper. By this time, I had decided I'm going to go the distance with this thing. I'm going to do the PhD because I want to be able to maybe teach this someday. And I really wanted to take a deep, super deep, more deep than probably I should have, dive into how media really intersects with our religious and spiritual development. So as I started really digging into these theories and all of this really kind of heavy academic stuff, I realized that because of the environment that young people live in today, they might be affected differently than you and I have, just
Absolutely.
because we started with a different floor plan, so to speak, right? And so I was like, well, maybe I should explore if there is a difference and how it is different. And so that's what my dissertation actually focused on was, did media exposure and technological exposure and interaction actually speed up the faith development process for young people?
Mm.
And my survey didn't show anything, but my interviews absolutely confirmed that happens, not just for faith development, but for all sorts of psychological development at that age. So there's definitely something there. It's something I would love to continue to study, but I found that little nugget, and I was like, I really want to keep doing this type of work for young people and really understanding this connection, because I do believe that spiritual health and mental health are so closely tied, that what you believe in your well-being is closely tied, regardless of what that is, right? And so I was lucky enough to be able to come on at Springtide. And at Springtide, that's what we do. We study, we use social scientific traditions and methods to study the well-being of people 13 to 25. And a lot of times that does focus on their religious and spiritual development, but we also look at how their religious and spiritual lives intersect with other pieces of culture. Like, for example, we're studying politics right now. So we have a
course.
thematic focus every year.
I
So
think
that's
it's
kind of how I landed there.
I think it's fast. You just said something that just made a light bulb go off in my brain. I think it was last week. It hasn't aired yet, but I just spent an episode talking about how media, the digital world, social media, and all these things, how the dangers are growing and creeping up on us. But I also focused a little bit on, but there is so much good that can be done and harnessed when it comes to the media. And you just, to me, put the explanation point on that, in that you just said spiritual and personal development can advance and grow with proper and good media usage. And so that is, I hope that my listeners just caught on to that, because, like I said before, media, especially social media and the new age of digital communication, it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. The dangers and the good. And what
Yep.
you just said is there's not just positive uses, but it could actually help us grow in our own personal and spiritual journeys. That's
Oh,
what I love.
absolutely. It absolutely can. Does social media have its pitfalls? For sure, especially for people whose brains are not fully developed yet. Yes, absolutely. And there's tremendous potential on these platforms to help them with those very processes, which is kind of ironic, but something that we should definitely try to harness, to use your language.
Oh, that's such a, I think that's one of the breaths of hope that we need to focus on and spread is that using the resources that are available to us digitally can help us, especially our young audience, help us gain a sense of who we are and what we want to become.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting. Um, I feel, and this is what I've seen in the research and just with my own personal use of social media, there can be a great autonomy with the way that you are able to explore your world and your reality that you and I didn't have. We had 4 channels on a box. And if
But
we
you
were,
had to get up to actually change the channel.
you
Not
had
just
to
click
get up
with
to
your thumb.
change.
That's right.
And if you were lucky, you might have had an Atari, a Nintendo, something like that. Um, you know, so we came from an era where the scope of the world was much smaller. Today, these young people live in a world that is way more expansive than ours is. And that has positive and negative effect. But if we are able to focus on harnessing how those mediums work for positive effect, we have the potential to actually generate younger people that are much more empathetic, that have better critical thinking skills, and that are just more well-rounded than you or I could have even been at that age, simply because we just didn't have the access to that level of information.
It's so true. My wife and I have 4 kids, and we're down to our last one in high school, and he's a great kid. As we've, in my experience and my background working with youth and healthcare, we've been extra careful at what we've allowed him to be exposed to, while making sure he wasn't living under a rock either, right? Trying to find that
That's
right
important too.
balance, right? And
Mhm.
and just the other day, well, not the other day, but over the last few months, he's been on this program on his device called, I may say it wrong, Duolingo, but
Oh, yeah.
okay.
The language app?
What's that?
The language app?
Yes.
Yes.
He has
Mhm.
this. We've been studying our family history over the last couple of years. My great grandparents come from Denmark and Sweden. And so we actually took a trip out there to kind of follow our roots, right? And so my son, Nathan, my 15, almost 16-year-old son, all of a sudden has become interested in his roots, and he wants to learn Danish. Well, there's not a lot of high schools that teach Danish, right? And so he's found this app and he's learning Danish. I think, what a great way. And so I have to be careful when I see him on his device that I don't just automatically assume he's playing a video game because I've made the mistake. Nate, I think you've been playing video games long enough. Dad, I just learned 2 paragraphs in Danish. Okay. Carry on, son, carry on. And so I love this, that when we promote the good use, it's the whole idea of focusing on positive reinforcement and not necessarily on negative reinforcement, which to our audience is, we don't want to focus on punishing bad behavior. Let's focus on rewarding good behavior. That's where you're the psychologist. I think, doesn't that give us much better results and end product when it comes to focusing our media usage with our young audience, our kids, our youth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, definitely for child and youth development in general, focusing on punishing bad behavior usually results in trauma down the line.
Yeah.
And that could be big T trauma or little T trauma.
Right.
And so, but if we take a positive spin on it, generally the sense of autonomy and ownership that young people are able to grow over time is greater and more effective. In media psychology, we have kind of a central premise if you will. So it's that we show up to media with all of our stuff, right? Our psychological profiles, our experience, where we grew up, all environmental influences, all of that stuff. Then we show up to media, we pass through it, we interact with it because media is only a tool or an entity. And then we come out on the other side with a psychological effect, either positive, neutral, or negative. And so social media itself, as the thing, the entity, doesn't cause anything, but it certainly offers an environment for whatever is already present to grow and evolve and shift, for better or for worse. So what we always want to focus on is what's that state before a young person even shows up to media? Because then we're already preparing them for the best experience with that thing.
Yes.
And hopefully, maybe more likely to come out on the other side with either positive or neutral effects, not negative ones. So that's, when we think about how we want to parent, that's the thing. It's like a lot of times I think we focus on the entity that is social media or that is the smartphone, that is the apps. We
Right.
want to focus our efforts on what happens before they even get one of those in their hands or they sign up for that first account, all of that sort of thing, because that really is where the magic happens and where parents can wield the most influence on some of these negative outcomes that we hear so much about.
So, okay, that's another great point that I've really never thought about. It seems like the focus of parents, teachers, leaders is all about keep media away from kids as long as we can, and then boom, we'll deal with it when they get on. I think what I hear you saying is that we need to focus on that stage and be more productive and more successful at preparing them for using media in positive ways. And maybe you can speak to this. What are so I haven't looked at any of this lately, but I think the age that kids are getting onto media is getting lower and lower. And so it can be a little bit disconcerting as a parent, and it can be a little bit daunting, but give us let's explore that for a minute. What are some strategies? What are some thought process or ways that parents, or even if I have some preteen listeners that are just barely getting kind of introduced to their first device, how can we better prepare ourselves, our kids, for productive media use that will help us get to that happy spot rather than just leaving it until they get on it and they choose their own pathway of media?
Oh, okay. Well, there's a lot there. I'm going to
Okay.
start. I'm going to start with young people first,
Okay.
because most of, I think, what I understand to be true about media in terms of a prescription, I use that term very loosely, is directed towards adults. So with young people, they are still figuring out some of these executive functions and some of these biological and emotional regulation skills, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, that they need to develop in order to use this device well, and all of the things that are in it. I think what's most important for a young person to understand is this activity online should not be impacting your sleep, your eating, and how much you interact with your schoolwork, friends, and family. If you feel like that device or anything on it is starting to get in the way of any of that, that's when we need to ask for help. That's when we need to look at exactly what's happening on said device and perhaps course correct, make adjustments, whatever the fact, because generally there's something happening through that device that's meeting a need. And so why is that need being met through the device instead of elsewhere? That's what we need to determine. So that as a young person, if you can notice that, and so I would encourage them to notice that if something is happening. Same for adults. When we think about problematic social media use, what we're looking for from an adult perspective are changes in cycles. If you're chatty Cathy kid has all of a sudden become very reticent and very quiet and is retreating a lot. And if you ask them about it, gets upset or unnecessarily defensive, then we might have something to talk about. That might signal problematic social media use. It could signal a lot of things. But those are the flags that we need to at least engage in more conversation to see what's really going on. So I want to raise that flag first, because if you do see any of those things, that's when you know, oh, okay. And then if you start to dig into conversation and you notice there's something going on, then it's like, oh, this might be out of my range of influence. I need professional help.
Right.
Do not be afraid to ask for that. Do not.
Right.
If it's something like, I think we're going to need to consult somebody, absolutely do. Even if you feel like it's an overreaction, because more than likely it's not.
Right.
So absolutely do that. In terms of productive social media use, again, if we go back to what's happening before media use, parents and other adults have the most kind of reign over, especially young teenagers, but I would say even when you get into emerging adulthood, many people think, oh no, friends are their biggest influence, all the peer influences. True, but the biggest one, by and large, what we see in the research is family. And so having those meaningful relationships can stave off a whole lot of stuff later. And the reason why is because you get that sort of social connection that many people turn to devices for. And if you're getting it offline, you're less likely to go and seek it from somebody online. You're also getting a sense of love and care and connectedness that you might try to get from a device if not at home.
But I see what you're saying, that this autonomy, this kind of automatic pathway is huge to understand.
It is. And so these relationships also serve as a delivery mechanism for a healthy self-concept, right?
Right.
So social media or the digital world doesn't serve as a primary source or sometimes even a secondary source of what is real. If we have our offline lives that are incomplete somehow or maybe lack meaningful connection, we might go to what is on a device and what it contains to fill in the gaps of that reality. If we have kind of whole lives offline, we know what we see on our devices is not always a full representation of reality. And so to have that offline is really, really key. Notice that I didn't say that meaningful relationships would equal never having a young person who is anxious or lonely or stressed. That's not it. But what I am saying is that when they have healthy, balanced lives offline, some of these negative outcomes that we hear about on social media are less likely to come to pass.
Right. And I'm going to back up just for a minute because I didn't want to interrupt your thought process, but you said something that, again, that I think it's worth emphasizing. And as parents, and by the way, teenagers, I'm talking to you too, that you may think, and this does not diminish the importance of, but we may think that friends from that age of 14 to 18 are number one. That's the ones we listen to the most. But what you said was that that's not necessarily true. And maybe where they spend a lot of their time, but the number one influencers are the loving parents and family that surround them. And I just couldn't help but think that on the parent side, parents don't ever underestimate the power of your influence, even when it might seem like they are lost in a sea of friends and media. And also part B is we have an opportunity that we might not think that we do, even when it seems like they don't want to listen to us or they don't want. And to the other side of the conversation, to my young adults and teenagers, don't underestimate the power of listening and connecting with the parents. that love you because they see a little bit further down the road than maybe this group of friends. And I'm not saying the group of friends is bad. I've had great kids that all they want to do is spend time with their friends. And luckily it's a great group of kids, but also don't underestimate the power and influence that your parents can have for you when it comes to looking further down the road. So I just wanted to bring that back to the forefront that even when it may seem opposite, the influence that family and parents have on our younger generations is still number one, and it can still have meaningful effect, even when it might seem that it doesn't in the immediate, in the now. Down the road, we might not see that the effect of it till down the road. Am I right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's interesting you bring this up because Springtide they collected data in 2019 for a study called Belonging. And they were interested kind of in this kind of loneliness epidemic before even the Surgeon General called it out years later. But what they found was super interesting. So when they cross-referenced people's self-report of either feeling alone or stressed with how many trusted adults they had in their lives, the numbers were staggering. So, for example, a young person who had 0 trusted adults in their lives, they had a self-report of feeling alone that was more than 62%.
Oof.
When you got to a young person who had 5 or more trusted adults, that percentage dropped to 9.
Oh, what a drop.
9%.
What
Yeah.
a drop.
So, and we saw that correlation in all of kind of these markers of loneliness, sadness, all of these marks. So what we understand is that as a young person has more trusted adults in their lives, the less likely, doesn't mean they won't, but the less likely they are to experience some of these negative mental health outcomes we've been hearing so much about. So it's super important for even those who are not related to a young person, but maybe are a teacher, a coach, some of these other formative adults in a young person's life. This makes a huge difference because they really do crave that meaningful connection with an adult, even though their behavior sometimes suggests otherwise, for sure.
That's
And I was just going to note that, yes, peers are important. And I know I might be an outlier in this, but you were referencing one of the Psychology Today posts that I wrote, referencing passing notes with my best friend as a young person in junior high, because we still passed notes then. I'm dating myself. But that person is still my best friend, and we're in our 40s.
Yeah.
And so sometimes these peer relationships are super formative. And it's important as a parent to recognize, I think these are the peer relationships that I should be supporting my young person having. Or if you see that there's some peer involvement that might not look as healthy, to notice that too. But as a parent, those are other trusted relationships that you can help a young person to foster on their own. Because sometimes we have to guide young people in learning how to be in relationship, period. Right? Regardless of who it is. And so that's another opportunity to do that.
In that article that you just referenced, which, by the way, I referenced in a previous episode because I loved that story. There was I think some collaborators, some researchers further down in the article that actually made something that was stunning to me. And that's that bringing media back into this little part of our conversation, that when we choose to follow and interact with people digitally, Facebook, Instagram, that we already have an offline relationship with, that can actually foster the relationship even further than it would have been before. That's phenomenal to me.
Well, and you might see it had been mirrored in your own social media use if you're on social. I know I've moved around a lot, and there's people that I've been able to keep up with solely because we are connected.
Right.
But that only added to the offline relationship we probably had years ago. And for young people who spend a lot of time tethered digitally, but maybe not so much in proximity, it's really important to have both sides because they don't have the benefits of the offline only life that we did. And so as much as they can get both sides of the coin, That's really, really important. So, when you make jokes about looking at your son's phone, it's like, oh no, is he goofing off playing a video game? Sometimes what looks like goofing off might actually be part of a healthy part of connection.
Right.
It might look like goofing off to you and me, but it's actually a healthy part of what it means to be a teenager these days.
And I think, it's been eye-opening to me because I've raised my kids in this ever-changing digital landscape. And it was just assumed that when your 13-year-old had a phone sitting on a couch with his AirPods in, it was just assumed he was either doing something non-productive or possibly something bad. But I've come to realize that there are good, positive communications, and it's important that we all know this, that communication is key and setting expectations is key so that when we see our son, daughter, or by the way, you teenagers, the communication is key for you as well. So that when you do have some screen time, be it productive screen time, there's a little bit less suspicion on the observer's point of view. And when that communication is set up so that we all understand as a family, whatever, in our groups, we understand that yes, there's going to be time for some downtime, right? Some brain dead time. I just want to go blast some Space Invaders for a while, right? Taking you back to Atari back in the 80s.
That was like, yes.
Right. And so, but sometimes they just need some time to just let their brains have a break from the engagement part and just have some entertainment part. But what I've learned is with my son, and he's been very patient with me, is when I am quick to say, Nate, you've been on that phone a long time. And he says, Dad, I've been reading the Bible, or Dad, I've been on Duolingo, or Dad, I'm actually registering. I realize I've had to say, and more than just not assume, but not bug him either, but find times when he's not on his device to say, hey, so tell me what you've been doing lately, digitally. Tell me what you've been up to lately and how I can help you in any way. And it's been huge. And gosh, I will tell you though, let's not underestimate either that there are those faction of kids. There are who struggle with online addiction, who struggle in the worlds of pornography, dark web, and violent video games that we know are not productive for advancing our happiness and success. So it's that ever fine line of making sure our kids aren't, and youth, that you're not veering off into what I call the left turn and trying to stay on the right turn.
Absolutely. So normally, especially for older kids, I'm not a fan of heavy monitoring or really dictating screen time because of what we've already been talking about. I think it's much more helpful to develop offline relationships with them and have them codify those relationships in order to be able to use media more efficiently and more responsibly. But where I do think we need heavy coaching and heavy monitoring is maybe as early as 8 or 9.
Right.
By
Beforehand. Yes.
We need it like from 10 to 14, that early adolescent period. That is the time for all of the monitoring, all the coaching, all of the check-ins, just like you were talking about, asking pointed questions about, well, what did you see? How did that make you feel? All of those sorts of things. That is how we really set young people up for success in this digital world, is being very intentional on how we're setting models of how to use this stuff. And that includes parents' use of it. What exactly are you modeling when it comes to the social media use? Is everyone at the table at dinner time on their device? When you go out to a restaurant, is everyone like this instead of actually engaging? Parents have to model that behavior just like they model several others. And for many of us, that can be a real challenge to model the best practice type behavior with these devices, because we have the probability of getting sucked in just like anybody else.
And I love that because, how many of us, I love that we need to make media training preparation just as much as preparation and training of anything else, right? When we have a 3-year-old, we don't send them to kindergarten never having cracked a book, right? We're starting to read books with them. We're introducing them to fun kid music. We're taking them to play dates and play groups. Same thing with media. Rather than the traditional sense was right that no, media is bad until they're 12, 14, 16. Then they can have a device. Well, we've been, what do you call it? We've been accessory to the bad behavior by not training them, coaching them, and showing them the beautiful and developmental parts of media. And this takes us to a good point to to end the segment here, because now to my listeners, we've divided up my interview with Dr. Patterson into 2 segments. We've gotten introduced now to this idea of the importance and the need to begin to train and learn how media can play an integral part of positive and productive development. And in our next segment, we're going to get into some strategies, like how can we start to introduce these ideas to our young kids and to my teenagers? What are some strategies that can help you to pivot and to change from some of the not so good things to using media to catapult you to even better and more productive objectives of success, happiness, and satisfaction? Dr. Patterson, this has been a very intriguing and great first segment. Thanks for joining us. For those that are listening, please hit me up on social media. I want to hear from you. Here's a great question that you can answer and shoot me in your questions. What is it about your media usage that you believe could hold the potential to help catapult you to greater areas of success? What are those livers, those little areas that you know are there that you could even engage in more to help you propel relationship to get you to that level of success that you want to be? Private message me, drop a comment or drop your question in the comment sections. But I want to hear from you. And don't forget, I choose one of those comments and I'm going to send you some gear, whether it be a Dr. Matt Jensen shirt, a Life Map hat. I will ship you some great gear because I want to hear from you. Make sure to tune in next week as we continue this conversation with Dr. Patterson, and I am looking for it. Dr. Patterson, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next segment.
Thank you.